The bedroom was dark except for the glow of her phone, 3:47 in the morning, and she was awake again. She set it down gently, careful not to disturb the silence, and stared at the ceiling she'd memorized in 1,000 sleepless nights. It wasn't always like this. She remembered falling asleep easily, waking refreshed. But somewhere in her mid-50s, sleep had become something she chased rather than something that found her. The doctors said it was normal. Hormones, stress, age. They offered pills she didn't want to take and advice that felt hollow. Sleep, hygiene, they called it, as if she hadn't already tried every pillow, every routine, every chamomile tea ritual known to humanity. But what no one mentioned was light. Not just whether the room was dark or bright, but the quality of light she lived in from morning until the moment she tried to sleep. She thought about her days. The harsh overhead lights in the kitchen at dawn, the blue glow of her laptop, the television in the evening, the sudden switch from bright to complete darkness when she finally turned everything off and hoped for rest. Her body was trying to tell her something. She just hadn't learned to listen yet. What she didn't know then was that her struggle had less to do with willpower or discipline, and everything to do with a visible rhythm her body had been following since birth, one that modern life had quietly disrupted. Researchers at the Lighting Research Center discovered something that changed how scientists think about sleep in older adults. It wasn't just about darkness at night. It was about the entire symphony of light exposure across 24 hours, and how dramatically that symphony had been distorted. Our eyes contain specialized cells that have nothing to do with vision. They exist solely to detect light levels and communicate that information to a tiny region in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, our internal clock. This clock governs when we feel alert, when we feel drowsy, when our body temperature rises and falls, when hormones release. In our 50s and beyond, something shifts. The lens of the eye gradually yellows, filtering out the blue wavelengths that most powerfully signal daytime to that internal clock. We need more light during the day to feel truly awake, but we're getting less of it, especially if we spend time indoors under conventional lighting. Then evening comes, and we flood ourselves with the exact wavelengths we should be avoiding. Screens, LED bulbs, bright bathroom lights before bed. Our internal clock receives a confusing message. Stay awake. She learned this not from a doctor, but from her daughter, who worked in architecture and had started reading about circadian lighting design. During a Sunday phone call, her daughter asked a simple question. "Mom, what's the light like in your house at night?" She paused. "I don't know. Bright enough to see. I guess that might be part of it." Part of her resisted the idea. She'd been dealing with sleep issues for 3 years. Could something as simple as light really matter that much? But she was tired. Not just physically, tired of being tired, tired of dreading bedtime, tired of watching the clock. So she decided to pay attention. That week, she started noticing the fluorescent bulbs in her kitchen that made everything feel sterile and cold, the lamp beside her reading chair that glared rather than glowed, the bathroom lights that felt like an interrogation room at 2 in the morning. She noticed that she felt more alert under these lights even when she wanted to wind down. She noticed that her husband, who fell asleep easily, spent his evenings in the dimmer corners of their home, often reading with just a small booklight. Maybe there was something here worth exploring. The first change she made was small. She replaced the bulb in her bedside lamp with a warm-toned LED, the kind that mimics candlelight rather than daylight. She started using only that lamp after 8 in the evening when she was in the bedroom. The difference wasn't immediate. But after a week, she realized something. She felt calmer in that space. Her mind didn't race quite as much. Then she went further. She installed smart bulbs in the living room and kitchen, the kind that could shift color temperature throughout the day. Bright, energizing light in the morning. Softer, amber tones as evening approached. It felt strange at first, almost theatrical, like she was staging her own life. But within days, her body started responding. She felt more awake during the day, more naturally drowsy as night progressed. What surprised her most was how gentle the shift was. She'd expected sleep aids to feel forced, something you impose on your body, but this felt like removing an obstacle, like she was finally working with her biology instead of against it. A study from Northwestern University found that adults over 55 who increased their daytime light exposure and reduced evening blue light improved their sleep quality by an average of 34 minutes per night. Not from medication, not from supplements, from light alone. She thought about all the years she'd blamed herself, thought she'd lost the ability to sleep well, as if it were a personal failing, when really, her environment had been sending the wrong signals all along. One evening, she sat in her living room as the lights gradually shifted from white to amber. Her husband looked up from his book. "It feels like sunset," he said. "That's the idea." He nodded, returned to his page. But she could see him relax into the chair in a way he usually didn't until much later. That's when she realized this wasn't just about her. It was about creating a home that supported rest for both of them, a space that honored the natural rhythm they'd both been ignoring. She started experimenting with other aspects of her environment. A dawn simulator alarm clock that gradually brightened 30 minutes before she needed to wake. blackout curtains that kept streetlights from leaking into the bedroom, a small motion-activated nightlight in the hallway, dim and red-toned, so it wouldn't jolt her awake during bathroom trips. These weren't expensive renovations. Most of it cost less than a month of the supplements she'd tried and abandoned. But the cumulative effect was profound. She began sleeping through the night more often. Not every night, she was realistic about that, but enough that she stopped dreading bedtime. Enough that she woke feeling rested rather than robbed. Her husband noticed the change before she fully did. "You seem lighter," he said one morning. She thought about that word. Lighter. Not younger, not fixed, lighter. As if she'd been carrying something she didn't need to carry anymore. But there was something else she discovered, something unexpected. The quality of her waking hours improved. With better sleep came better focus. Less irritability, more patience. The afternoon fog that had become her constant companion started to lift. She'd thought of sleep as separate from the rest of her life, something that happened in the dark while everything else paused. But now she understood. Sleep wasn't separate. It was the foundation everything else was built on. What surprised me most wasn't just how smart lighting made life easier, but how it gave me back a sense of control. I didn't expect such a clear shift in daily comfort. I tested it quietly, and over time, I noticed the difference wasn't small. This isn't a promotion, just sharing something that truly worked for me. I'll leave the link below if you'd like to see what I mean. The science behind it made sense when she finally dug deeper. Our bodies evolved under natural light, sunrise, sunset, firelight. For hundreds of thousands of years, that rhythm was unbreakable. Then, in the blink of evolutionary time, we introduced electric light. For younger people, the disruption is manageable. Their circadian systems are robust enough to adapt, at least partially. But in our 50s and beyond, that flexibility diminishes. Our internal clocks become more sensitive to disruption and less responsive to the cues they need. Modern lighting, for all its convenience, wasn't designed with human biology in mind. It was designed for visibility and efficiency. No one thought about what it might be doing to our sleep. Until recently, in the last decade, researchers have begun mapping exactly how different wavelengths of light affect our physiology at different times of day. The findings are elegant in their simplicity. Blue-enriched light in the morning and afternoon, wakeful, alert, focused. Warm, dim light in the evening, calm, restful, ready for sleep. It's not about living by candlelight, it's about intentionality, about matching your environment to what your body needs in each moment. She shared her experience with a friend who'd been complaining about sleep for years. At first, her friend was skeptical. "It can't be that simple." "It's not just simple," she replied. "It's almost invisible. That's what makes it work." Her friend tried it. 2 weeks later, she called. "I don't know if it's the lights or a coincidence, but I'm sleeping better." "Does it matter which?" she asked. Her friend laughed. "I guess not. That's the thing about solutions that work quietly. They don't announce themselves. They just make life a little easier, a little smoother, a little more aligned with how we're actually built." She thought back to those 3 a.m. mornings, staring at the ceiling, how desperate she'd felt, how small and powerless in the face of her own biology. Now, months later, those nights felt distant, not erased. She still had occasional rough nights, but no longer dominant. She'd found a rhythm that worked. Not by fighting her body, but by finally giving it what it had been asking for all along. One morning, she woke before her alarm, naturally, gently, as the dawn simulator filled the room with soft light. She lay there for a moment, noticing the quality of the waking. No grogginess, no resistance, just a quiet transition from sleep to day. She thought about all the complicated solutions she'd tried. The supplements and schedules and sleep trackers. None of them had addressed the fundamental issue. Her environment was fighting against her biology. Sometimes the answer isn't about doing more, it's about removing what's in the way. The bedroom was filled with early light now, real sunlight through the window, warm and gradual. She could hear her husband breathing beside her, still asleep. She closed her eyes again, not because she needed more rest, but because she could. Because sleep was no longer something she feared losing. She'd spent years thinking of sleep as something she'd lost. But maybe she hadn't lost it at all. Maybe it had been there the whole time, waiting for the right conditions to return. Researchers at Harvard Medical School emphasize this point when working with older adults. Sleep problems in our 50s and beyond aren't always about pathology. Often, they're about environment. About the mismatch between how we live now and what our bodies still need. The solution isn't always medical intervention. Sometimes it's about creating the conditions for natural processes to function as they should. She never thought she'd become someone who talked about circadian rhythms and color temperature. But here she was, explaining to her sister over lunch how different light bulbs had changed her sleep. Her sister listened, curious but cautious. "Did you have to rewire your whole house?" "No, I started with one lamp, then another." You don't have to change everything at once. That's what she wished someone had told her 3 years ago. That transformation doesn't require revolution. It requires small, thoughtful adjustments, and the willingness to pay attention to what works. She remembered the conversation with her daughter that started all this, how skeptical she'd been, how desperate enough to try something that seemed almost too simple to matter. Now she understood. The most powerful changes often feel subtle. They don't announce themselves with fanfare. They just quietly shift the foundation until everything built on top of it shifts too. Her energy was different now, more stable, less dependent on caffeine to get through the afternoon. Her mood was more even. Her patience with herself and with others had deepened. All because she was sleeping, really sleeping. The kind of sleep that restores rather than just pauses. She thought about the version of herself from a year ago, how tired she was. How resigned to the idea that this was just how life would be now. How wrong she'd been. Age changes things, that's true. But it doesn't have to steal everything. Sometimes, it just asks us to adapt. To honor the body we have now, instead of grieving the body we used to have. The evening light in her home now shifted gradually, almost imperceptibly. By 9 o'clock, the living room glowed warm and low. She felt her shoulders drop, her breathing slow. Her body knew what was coming. This wasn't about tricking herself into sleep. It was about creating the right conversation between her environment and her biology. A conversation that had been interrupted by modern life, and that she'd finally learned to restore. When she turned off the lights and climbed into bed now, she didn't lie awake wondering if sleep would come. She trusted it. Not with certainty. Some nights were still harder than others, but with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt in years. The room was dark, the way it should be. The streetlights didn't leak through anymore. The alarm clock didn't glow. Just darkness, and her breath, and the sound of her husband sleeping beside her. She thought about light, how something so ordinary, so overlooked, could matter so much. How we build our lives around convenience and forget to ask what we're giving up in exchange. She wasn't angry about the years she'd struggled. She'd learned something valuable. Not just about light and sleep, but about paying attention. About questioning what seems normal just because it's common. When she awoke the next morning, the light through the window hit the floor in that same familiar pattern. The kitchen looked the same, the coffee smelled the same, but something about the day felt different. Not because the room had changed, but because she had. Because she'd stopped fighting herself and started listening instead. She poured her coffee slowly, savoring the quiet. Outside, the morning was just beginning. Inside, she felt rested, present, ready. This is what good sleep does. It doesn't just help you rest, it helps you live. It gives you back the energy to be curious, patient, engaged. To show up for your life instead of just getting through it. She thought about sharing this with more people. Not evangelizing, just offering what she'd learned. Because if there were others out there staring at their ceilings at 3 in the morning, wondering what was wrong with them, she wanted them to know. Sometimes nothing is wrong. Sometimes the environment is just out of sync with what you need. And sometimes, the solution is simpler than you think. What part of this story spoke to you most? And where are you watching from? Tell us which city or country you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.